My name is Connor McNamara. I'm a Curriculum and Resource Advisor with the Métis-Nation of Ontario, also a citizen of the Penetanguishene Historic Community. And I'm here today talking with Sheree about a bunch of your books and a whole bunch of things. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Cherie Dimaline. I'm an author, a screenwriter, I guess a librettist now because I'm working on opera adaptations of my work as well. And I am a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario, specifically descendant from the Penetanguishene Halfbreeds.
Do you find it difficult, like, setting stories in your home community?
No, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. In fact, after I wrote The Marrow Thieves, which was, very tough subject matter, really difficult to try and hold that story, really stories that were inside of that book. The only thing that I wanted to do after was to write about home. And so I did. I wrote Empire of Wild, but it was because it was so tough going out and having all those conversations about residential school and genocide and trauma that I really wanted to come home. And so writing Empire of Wild, which is here, it's in Penetang, and it's across the bay where the community was and still is largely. It was so comforting, and I remembered what that joy was. This is where I learned my stories. This is where, generations of my family, those stories came down. So storytelling and writing are very, very different. Storytelling is fun. A lot of it is performance. So it's the cadence of how you're telling the story, the pitch and level of your voice, even the movements that you take into it, and you can really almost physically direct people's attention. So there's a performative element to it, and that's a part of oral storytelling. And the people that I learned stories from, my mare, my grandmother, and her sisters, it was about when they would slip in and out of the language and where I had to pay attention. And when they wanted me to pay attention to something, they didn't get louder, they got quieter. Because when someone is speaking softer, you have to lean in and really listen to pay attention. So I think that's really interesting. It's a good way to go when you can. Changing it into writing is about a lot of trial and error. It's about trying to make sure that you get those same elements. So thinking about the story, in particular for me, I use a lot of old stories in my writing. So I'll think about, say, an old Rougarou story that I heard. Think about the ways that it made me feel, and the images that came to mind, and what that whole experience was inside of my body, hearing it, and then trying to translate that into written language. So word choice, certain words, are harsher. They're sharp, almost have more consonants. Other words are more luxurious. They're longer. They have a lot of vowels. So how those words make you feel, and then even down to sentence structure. So like say in the Marrow Thieves, when the characters are running, those sentences are constructed in a way that if you are truly in the story and you're reading really closely, your breathing is going to change, because the way the sentences are structured, it's like breath work. And so if you're reading it closely, it's going to change the way you're breathing, and you're going to feel that tension. And so now you are there. So for me, it's about using the tools of writing and trying to envision how they're going to be received as the reader.
Mm-hmm. And with, like, tools, one of the things we found really interesting was the tool of, like, stories within story,
Yeah.
like the actual character's storytelling.
Yeah.
Why do you really want to use that kind of literary device of, like...
Yeah. So in the Marrow Thieves, each of the characters has a coming to story.
Mhm.
So they talk about who they are, and we learn about what's important to them, because that's how I was raised. When I spent a lot of time back home with my mare, my grandmother, and her sisters, and I would, depending on where we lived, because my family moved around a lot, we would come back home. I would be sent back home all the time, every summer certainly, with my mare. But I would come back into the community, and my mayor would always, she was very adamant that I explain who I am to people. I introduce myself to people, because who you are at that moment is about what's important to you at that moment. So somebody saying, this is, Cherie, this is the school she goes to. Here's what she wants to be when she grows up. Well, that might not be important to me at that moment. I might want to say, I'm Joni's daughter. My family comes from across the bay, and I'm a great fisherman. That might be what's important to me at that moment. So that was really empowering for me growing up, having the ability to frame myself, to introduce myself to people. And I love that for characters. I love that for us as people. I love when we introduce ourselves to each other and we talk about our family connections and we talk about where we come from in terms of the land, maybe what traditions we come from. I love, when you and I talk, we talk about our family, how they hunt. That's really important. I know more about you and your family now because of that conversation we had. I feel closer to you, which means I feel responsible to you and for you, which means there's safety now, right? So I know where your family's hunting. I know the systems that you use, which means I know your values, which makes me feel more love towards you and your people. And that's, so I love the beauty of that small storytelling that we do with each other. And so whenever I can give that to a character, to have that safety, to have that ability to introduce themselves, I think it makes readers love them a little bit more.
So, why do you think it's so important to share our stories? Um, Not just as Indigenous people, but like specific nations, specific communities. Like, why is that distinction more important now, would you
Yeah.
say?
So I think it's incredibly important because the landscape is shifting. I think, not just physically the landscape, but also physically the landscape. I think so many things are shifting and changing, and we need to hold on to who we are. So I think about it this way. When I was growing up in the community, um, there were cottagers around, and that was fine. They had great canoes we could borrow. And, we made lots of friends, and that was fine. But there was more community members than there were cottagers. And we had access, to the water, to the bay. And we were there all the time. We lived on the bay. I would swim, for so long and boat for so long that I would, feel waves when I was lying in bed at night to go to sleep. And all of that has changed now. We know that, our land wasn't held for us. And so there are $1 million cottages. We can't even really see the water anymore. And so just in my lifetime, the difference in what people have access to, we were still able to hunt around here. We would fish. And largely that's gone now. We are, cottage country for privileged people from the city. And I think about that loss of home, because that really is home, right? When I would spend time with my mare, my great aunties, and all of my cousins, we would walk around, and we were kings, right? We just felt this sense of majesty, that this was our land, like this is where we were from. And we would harvest, we'd go into the woods, we would fish. We always had good food, even when we had nothing. We were always full, even when there was nothing. um, and I think about passing that along. I think about the privilege that I had growing up in this, largely poor, um, struggling community that nevertheless was so full and so beautiful. And I think about, what can I give my kids? Well, I can't take them to the places that I would spend time in when I was younger, because they're gone. It's private property now. And I think about, the activities that I did as a young person that made me feel so confident in who I was as a member of this community. And a lot of those activities, the hunting and harvesting, we can't do here anymore. And so I think about the one thing that's left, and the one thing that I know that is left for sure are the stories. even the language is changing. The last fluent speaker who spoke the language first and English second was my great auntie Flora Gervais. When she passed on, there was no one left that had that level of fluency. And so we lost some of the understandings that came in those words that had no translation really, and the ceremonies that she held and the medicine that she made. But I think about the stories. The stories are important. And so I'm very cautious when people tell stories and they say, well, this is a Métis story. Well, what community? Because we're very different and distinct communities, right? It's like, Anishinaabe, the Anishinaabe community. There's the Anishinaabe people, there's, different dialects within that language, there's different communities, different ways of hunting, different areas you live in. It's the same with Métis communities. We're not just one monolith within that nation. And I think it's so important to hold on to the stories of our specific communities, because if I can't pass the stories and preserve the stories and protect that knowledge onto my children, then I'm denying them access to their home, because our home is largely geographically gone because the land's been moved and it's been bought up. And so home exists within those stories. And that's the way that they were given to us, because again, we are a people who were moved. And so the home was held in those stories. And so if I don't protect the stories and tell the stories specific to this community, then I am allowing my children to be homeless. And I cannot allow that. I must provide a home for them. I think that's all of our responsibilities, is holding space within stories that allows every child to find a home. Not just a place to sort of exist, but a space to live, to truly live. But it's not that, we had Indigenous ancestors and French ancestors and that's what makes us Métis. It's that, there were children born of those unions who then married into other families with children born of those unions, whose children then married into other community families. And for generations, that's how it went. We married into each other's family lines. We stayed within the community. We spoke our own dialect. We hunted specifically. We made our own medicines. We had our own stories. And all of it was not about being half this and half that. It was about those places where it was combined. And many of our families had relations in other Métis or half-breed communities across the homeland. So in my particular case, my père's family come from the Red River, but married into my mère's family, who were Great Lakes half-breeds, from Drummond Island and from the communities around here. But it was about that connection of way of life, of understanding of how to be the best version of yourself and how to live a good life as a community member, and about those things, hunting and storytelling and traditions. And so it was all about kinship. So being across the bay wasn't like, here are these people that are half this and half that. We were wholly and entirely unto ourselves. And we're very specific about, we are not First Nations, we are not French. This is who we are as a people. And in fact, there was the Penetanguishene Halfbreed Petition that was put out when, our community members petitioned the government, and they signed onto it, that identified us. And I think the petition was about getting presents, wasn't it? It was about
Gift giving
gift
policy,
giving,
right?
right? It was about the government fulfilling their responsibilities with an Indigenous community.
Yeah.
Okay, so a few of my ancestors are on that, signed the petition.
It was a nation-to-nation relationship that was happening, and then they cut it off.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Since you know all this, do you remember the year? Was it 1840? Was it the 40s?
I think it was the 40s.
Okay.
I could be wrong, though.
So that petition that specifically said, we the undersigned half-breeds residing at the township of Penetanguishene, they specifically identified themselves as a separate nation of people, of Indigenous people, that was, and this is in the Métis Museum. That was the first half-breed petition to come from any Métis community. So that is historic to this nation. It was about us identifying as a specific, unique people. So I think it's important to understand that, before, Red River happened with the rebellions and the political action there, which was enormously important, cannot be, undersold for how important that nation building and that pushing back against colonialism was. But it's important to remember that the first half-breed petition came from here, where we are sitting in Penetanguishene, and also to remember that it continued down to us sitting here today